I'm now convinced, more than likely, this is a blood-semen mixture.
We didn't know what this DNA was all about. I knew nothing of it. I had heard of it.
This was very new technology. This was one of our very first cases.
Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Today, DNA analysis is accepted as the forensic tool of the 21st century. But let me take you back to a time before DNA was a science accepted in court. Let me take you back to the year 1990, to a Sunday morning in mid-October. Alice Keading was 6 years old, the only child of divorced parents. Her mother, Grace, was on welfare and struggled to make ends meet. At 7:30 on that Sunday morning, Alice watched cartoons with her mother's new boyfriend. Even though she'd known him less than 2 months, she called him Dad. But things weren't always that smooth between Grace and her boyfriend. At 9 a.m., Alice told her mother she was going out to play. She was allowed to be on her own, but only in and around the building. A neighbor remembered seeing Alice playing at 9:30. When she didn't return for lunch at 11:30, her mother became worried. As time passed, Grace became frantic. At 1 o'clock, when there was no sign of Alice, Grace Keading reported her missing to the police.
You've got to stay as professional as you can, and you've got to shut off your emotional ties to the case. It's harder to do in some cases than others, and these types certainly are the hardest to do. It may sound cold to some people. It probably is cold, but if you don't do that, the case is going to flounder.
She told police that Alice was an obedient child who'd never wandered off on her own. Grace's theory was that some deranged, childless woman had kidnapped the most beautiful little girl in the world, her Alice. Local police mounted what is known as a full-scale Phase 3 search. They put 77 officers into the hunt, a canine unit, a helicopter, and an infrared scope, and hundreds of civilian volunteers. They scoured the neighborhood around Alice's building and looked behind every bush in the valley north of the apartment building. They even checked nearby sewers. The 6-year-old seemed to have vanished into thin air. Grace retreated to her apartment. She wasn't waiting for the phone to ring. Her phone had been turned off months earlier because she couldn't afford to pay her bill. One of the first suspects was Grace herself. A neighbor reported seeing a man and a woman arguing outside the building the night before and driving off with a child in a blue van.
This was the premise that the first police officers were dealing with at the time that they met the mother, and they felt initially that the mother wasn't being truthful with them, and that something had happened in the early morning hours that really resulted in the child being missing.
After an excruciating 24 hours, Grace was cleared when police learned it was a completely different family in the blue van. Meanwhile, the search continued day after day. After 7 days, police informed Grace that they were calling off the search. Grace had never felt so helpless. The police had searched every apartment and all 5 floors, 5 times. But technically, the building had 6 floors. There was a boiler room on the roof. 2 days after the search had been called off, an electrical inspector came upon Alice Keading's body, partially hidden behind one of the boilers.
The room was poorly ventilated, extremely warm, and as happens in these types of conditions, the body had begun to decompose, and at the time of its discovery was in an advanced stage of decomposition.
It was one of the most difficult autopsies the pathologist had ever performed.
Evidence of a sexual component in this case included a massive laceration of the vagina. This was of a very gross nature and would certainly qualify as a brutal sexual assault associated with, in my opinion, the asphyxiation of this child.
With no eyewitness to Alice's abduction and murder, the case would hinge on minute evidence found at the scene of the crime. Using a ladder so as not to contaminate the floor of the boiler room, the forensic ident squad collected hairs and fibers one by one.
It's what we call associative evidence. That is, we try to link people with each other, people with objects, or objects with objects, by the association of trace matters such as hairs and particularly fibers.
Then the ident officers found something else. A small smear on the boiler room floor, something with a liquid content. They didn't know what the smear was, or what it contained. This is when Keith Kelder entered the case. He tested the substance for blood.
In an instant, quick reaction, yes. But I suspected blood being present. Looking at it visually, it's now confirmed.
Then Kelder made a second test. Kelder rubbed the paper with a tiny amount of a chemical solution.
The tests for semen. It's an enzymatic reaction, just as the first test is. And because of the reaction being so intense, I'm now convinced, more than likely, this is a blood-semen mixture.
A sample was also sent to the newly created DNA lab at the Center of Forensic Science. Who had raped and murdered 6-year-old Alice Keading? Exhibit A, a tiny smear of blood and semen held the answer. Homicide investigators interviewed more than 70 people who had access to the boiler room, but in the end, they narrowed the list down to 4 prime suspects. Suspect 1 was Reggie Warner, the building's assistant superintendent. Police learned he'd had an affair with Grace Keading, Alice's mother. That got their attention. So did the fresh cut across the top of Warner's nose. The second suspect, Fred Linus, was an assistant janitor in the building. Number 3 was the youngest suspect, 19-year-old Johnny Tercera. He was a part-time janitor at the building and had been assigned to work the Sunday morning Alice vanished. Then there was a fourth suspect, Grace's boyfriend, Wayne Sorensen. In the 2 months they'd been together, police had been called to intervene in their domestic disputes more than once. All four had alibis as to their whereabouts between 9:30 and 11 that Sunday morning. Reggie Warner claimed he'd gotten the cut on his nose in a barroom fight on the Saturday night. That's why Sunday he'd spent watching TV and doing chores around his house. Fred Linus insisted that Saturday night and Sunday morning he'd been out of town at a motel. Johnny Tercera admitted he'd overdone booze and grass that Saturday night and had been so sick Sunday morning he'd come into work at 8:30 and left less than an hour later. Wayne Sorensen maintained he'd been with Grace Keading the whole time. As investigators checked out their alibis, they wanted something else from the four suspects. Samples of scalp hair, samples of pubic hair, samples of saliva, and samples of blood were taken from each of the suspects. The samples were taken to the Center of Forensic Science, where the forensic team would begin a painstaking process of analysis.
Anytime we're examining either hairs or fibers, it's obviously very easy to say something is different, and therefore we can eliminate it. However, when we find similarities, it may require very extensive testing to determine by a battery of tests whether there are, in fact, still similar at the end of the day.
Crocker was trying to match hairs collected from the suspects with torso hairs collected on the floor of the boiler room. At the time of this case, the early 90s, the ABO system was still the standard for analyzing blood. There were 4 blood types: type A, type B, type O, and type AB. In about 20% of the population, blood types could also be ascertained through bodily secretions, such as saliva and semen. Kelder determined from Alice's medical records that she was type O, and that the blood in the smear on the boiler room floor was type O. This meant that the semen in the mixture came from a man who was type O and a secretor. Despite tremendous odds, Kelder also examined the victim's clothes for semen.
It was extremely important to establish that semen is not only present at the scene on the floor, not far from the body, but also present on the clothing. And so that too had to be vigorously pursued. And even though someone might say, you're not going to find anything on here, it's impossible. How, after this length of time, and yet we pursued it, and yet we got a positive reaction, and yet we found a spermatozoa. And no, it was not sufficient for ABO typing. I mean, it's something far more discriminating, and DNA fit the bill.
Pam Newell would try to compare the DNA from the 4 suspects with the DNA on Alice Keading's clothes and the DNA from the blood-semen mixture in the boiler room.
The interesting thing about the DNA molecule is that 99.9% of all of our DNA is the same. And it's what I call, when I'm talking to a jury, housekeeping DNA. It's the DNA that makes a human being as opposed to an orange peel. So it's DNA that says put a head on the top, 2 eyes, 2 ears, a nose, fingernails, toenails, functioning heart, functioning liver. We're not interested in that sort of DNA when we do forensic DNA analysis because we're all the same. It doesn't help us in answering the question, could this sample have come from this person? What we need to look at is that very small proportion of the DNA molecule where there are differences, where we have the ability to distinguish one person from another.
Of course, given that this would be Canada's first major DNA case, the results would have to be presented in a way that a judge and jury would understand and accept. As for Grace Keading, one day was hard to distinguish from the next. The littlest things could set her off. The bigger things were devastating. Her desire for revenge scared her, and the pain of her murdered daughter seemed too big for one heart to contain.
In a case like this, it gets a lot of public attention. There's a great deal of pressure that comes with these cases. You know that somewhere out there is someone who's done probably the most horrendous crime that could be done, and you've got a duty to find them and bring them before the justice system.
While Alice Keading's murderer still walked free, detectives relied on forensics for their next move. Keith Kelder was ready with his results. Whoever had raped and murdered Alice Keading was a type O and a secretor. Reggie Warner was a type B and a non-secretor. Fred Linus was another type B and a non-secretor. Wayne Sorensen was a type A and a non-secretor. Johnny Tercera was a type O and a secretor. The catch was that approximately 15% of all humans are type O and secretors. Jim Crocker's hair and fiber evidence also pointed to Tercera. From Grace Keading, detectives learned that Tercera had once chased away some boys who were picking on Alice. Because of that, Alice told her mother that Tercera was so cool.
We had surveillance on him. Whenever he would leave from an interview with us, that would tend to be kind of a wild night for him. He'd be out on foot through a lot of the drug areas where he'd be using drugs and alcohol.
Despite all of this, they still didn't have enough to arrest Tercera, but they were zeroing in. Hoping he'd confess, investigators told Tercera they had physical evidence he'd been in the boiler room. That's when he changed his story. He confessed, but only to smoking dope in the boiler room.
Initially, he had denied being up in the room at all or knowing anything about the missing child, and he later changed that and said that on the day, or shortly thereafter, I should say, he had seen the body in the boiler room and that he chose not to tell anyone. He was afraid that he would get into trouble for being up there and finding the body.
Gauthier didn't believe him, but in the hands of a skilled defense lawyer, it could easily be argued that of course traces of Johnny Tercera's hair and blood were found in the boiler room. He was the assistant janitor. They were simply there from some other time. To counter this, Keith Kelder did further tests on the blood-semen mixture.
It could be argued in court that the semen was deposited by the suspect at one point by way of masturbation, and the blood just came later and just happened to be deposited on top of it. And I rejected that hypothesis. The blood and semen were mixed together before they arrived on the floor, before they were applied on the floor. The implications of that are very important.
The sample went straight to Pam Newell's DNA lab. Molecular biologists have developed methods of isolating each DNA molecule and cutting it into different lengths in order for it to be measured and compared. These isolated strands of DNA are then mounted on a plate covered with a gel. When an electrical current is applied, the strands start to move. The gel is then photographed using X-rays, and the result looks like a barcode and is called an autorad.
So think to yourself of all of the swimmers being lined up across the top at the beginning of the race. The race starts, they all start moving down the lanes, and when the race stops, they're stopped in that particular point. We were interested particularly in the profile from the semen on the floor. Now, compared to that, we have DNA samples from suspect number 1, suspect number 2, suspect number 3, and a sample from suspect number 4. When we compare the profile from the semen on the floor to the profiles from each of these 4 suspects, we see that we have a match to suspect number 3, as defined on this particular film.
Pam Newell generated 5 such autorads to compare different parts of the DNA from the semen on the floor. 4 of those tests matched Johnny Tercera's DNA. The odds of such a match is 1 in 1.7 million. despite these overwhelming odds, Detective Gauthier was still reluctant to arrest Tercera.
We held back the arrest for about a 10 or 14-day period because we didn't know what this DNA was all about. I knew nothing of it. I had heard of it. I didn't know what the tests could show or would show. So we held back until such time as we became educated in what DNA was about.
It was the prosecution's case that on that Sunday morning Alice was looking for a playmate. Tercera came along. At his trial, Tercera's mother swore that Johnny arrived home at 11 a.m., making it impossible for him to have committed the murder. The defense grilled Grace Keading about her finances, her drinking, her sex habits. They exposed every fear and doubt she had about being a good mother, anything to shift the blame away from Johnny Tercera. Then Pam Newell was called to the stand.
This was one of our very first cases, and it was with my heart in my throat that I went into the witness box to give these answers, because we all very much wanted to present the technology in the way in which it should be presented, to give it its fair weight, to present it in an objective and accurate fashion.
She was grilled for 14 days. Ultimately, the jury chose to believe the evidence of her silent witness, a strand of DNA. Johnny Tercera was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life. When you lose a child through murder, you fall into a deep black hole of bitterness and depression. If you're lucky enough to have the right support at the right time, you can slowly climb back up into the light. Grace was not so lucky. She had lost the only bright spot in her life. 6 years after the death of her daughter, Grace Keading committed suicide.
This is my first case in homicide. They weren't referred to by a surname and a first name, but by their street names.
And also in this case, there was a vodka bottle.
I've been doing this now, homicides now, for 10 years, and he is one of the wickedest people I've dealt with.
Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. The Brothers Grimm made up fairy tales that warn children about the evils of the world. This is a contemporary Grimm fairy tale, only it's true. Exhibit A, not what was in the bottle, but the bottle itself. The fire is in a 3-story derelict house in one of the city's most upscale neighborhoods. Because it's been boarded up, the fire is confined to one front room. As firefighters assess the damage, they detect an odor.
If you've ever experienced the smell of a burnt victim, within the confines of a structure. It's something you don't soon forget.
The body is charred beyond recognition. Initially, it's thought the victim is a transient who fell asleep while smoking. To confirm the cause of death and help determine the victim's identity, the body is sent to the morgue to be autopsied by a forensic pathologist.
The back of the body showed 2 areas where the skin had been spared from the effects of heat. The skin was clearly white. There was a charred gag in the mouth of the individual, and obviously a gag in the mouth would preclude smoking and careless use of cigarette butts. The body appeared to be that of a young female. I stopped what I was doing at that stage and awaited the arrival of the homicide investigators.
This was my first case in homicide. It became quite clear that this was not a fire death at all. In fact, it was a homicide, and a rather brutal homicide.
The cause of death in this case was attributed to ligature strangulation effected by the elastic material in the bra, which was tightly bound twice around the neck. There was evidence of injury to the vagina, that this woman was bound around the ankles, and had the effect of fire not been so great, it would be my opinion that she was equally bound by the wrists.
Because of the sexual assault aspect of it, because of the forcible confinement and the arms being tied, the ligature across the throat, the gag in the mouth, various other aspects of it, it was always a first-degree murder.
Now that it's an official homicide, investigators return to the house. They search the front room where the body was found, looking for clues. Then they head for the 2nd and 3rd floors.
Once at the 3rd floor, it became quite obvious somebody had set up a small room at the front of the house.
Detectives would later discover the place was a squat house for street kids.
There was rats running around. There was human excrement all over because they had been using this place for what they call a squat. And of course that's what squat means. We squat and we do our thing. Some of the rooms were actually knee-deep in discarded items.
Detectives survey the crime scene, but the ident people actually collect the evidence.
Well, we never know in the first instance, what role any particular item can play in the thing. And you can assume that it's going to have considerable importance in some way, but again, at that time, you really don't know.
At this point, the investigation has 2 major prongs: to find out who committed the murder and to determine the victim's identity.
We started searching our own Toronto files to begin with for missing persons. We had an approximate age. We had a female who, a range of age was 15 to 25, 30. We had no idea. We put out a request through the media, and as a result of that, there was one phone call from an officer in Niagara region who hooked up a missing person down there. We got dental records, and from the dental records, an odontologist matched up the teeth, and that's how we did our identification of her.
The victim was a 16-year-old girl, the youngest daughter of professional parents. She was from a small city near Niagara Falls. Her name was Cynthia Ray. As a last gasp of freedom before starting a summer job at a local burger joint, Cynthia Ray and a young friend had hitchhiked into Toronto to spend a weekend hanging out in the punk scene. That was on a Friday. On the following Tuesday morning, her charred remains had been discovered. What had happened in between? and who had murdered Cynthia Ray. Grady's investigation plunged him into a unique and alien culture, the punk and skinhead universe.
They weren't referred to by a surname and a first name, but by their street names. So we got familiar with those street names. And then when we referred to them as their street names, I think they appreciated it. They were quite cooperative to speak with. You know, we had some of these kids come in and they would have their Doc Marten boots. Like, there were all kinds of different boots they wore. Paratrooper boots, there was army boots, there were police boots. Within this little hierarchy, Doc Martens were the ones that everybody wanted to wear.
Investigators eventually discovered Cynthia Ray had been seen with a guy whose street name was Rodent. Rodent was a punk from a well-to-do family. He'd met Cynthia on Saturday afternoon when she bought a bunch of them some fast food and booze. Cynthia was what was known as a poser, a kid who lived at home during the week and made the scene on the weekends. On the plus side, she had a bank account. When Rodent noticed Cynthia had too much to drink, he felt sorry for her.
There was a woman there who was out taking photographs of interesting people. And there was a group of which the now deceased, they were amongst the group of people who were being photographed along with some other street kids.
Rodent and Cynthia slept in a park Saturday night. The next day, Sunday, they hung out together and later had sex in a parking lot stairwell. But when Rodent called home and found out that a girl he'd met in Europe was at his parents' house, he decided to go home. The last time he'd seen Cynthia Ray, she was talking to a couple of guys she knew.
Sean Ross, who was known as Football, at this time was 16 years of age. The other, James Harbottle, he was a little older. I think he was 19 or 20 at the time of the offense. He was a punk rocker. He had his hair in a mohawk at one point. He had it shaved right down at one point. He had leather jackets, studs. He was more of a guy who had a rough life and lived on the streets because of his rough life.
It turned out Harbottle had met Cynthia and a friend when they were panhandling the month earlier. He gave them a tab of acid. That night, while her friend slept in a nearby bed, Cynthia had sex with Harbottle. The place where they had spent the night was the same squat house where a month later Cynthia was found murdered. Harbottle's street name was Evil. Meanwhile, the vodka bottle had been sent to the Center of Forensic Science to be analyzed.
One of the issues was whether she'd been sexually assaulted. And so routinely in homicide cases, we get a number of medical samples to check to see whether or not there's semen present. I had those, and also in this case, there was a vodka bottle. In this particular case, I noticed some crusty yellow material in the area around the bottle cap. What we want to do is get the material off, and then it's simply a question of swabbing that area. So from looking at the bottle, swabbing off the material, and then testing it, this is what we find. First, that we have spermatozoa present. Secondly, that we have epithelial cells present. And thirdly, that they're vaginal epithelial cells because there's a lot of glycogen present in most of the cells. That combination plus the typing was consistent with the Crown's theory of what had happened, which was that the vodka bottle had been inserted vaginally.
This confirmed Rodent had slept with Cynthia, but what about Evil or Ross?
All we knew at that time is they were the last ones to be seen with the deceased, and off they had gone. And we had no story from then until when the deceased is found. So we wanted to locate them and find out, was there another perpetrator, was there something else? Did they perhaps smoke a joint or whatever and just leave her with somebody else? We had to find them.
Grady received a report that Evil and Ross were stopped on the outskirts of Toronto by a police officer and told to move on. The officer noted that Ross had a pair of 8-hole Doc Marten boots. Cynthia Ray had 8-hole Doc Martens. The next report was that they had hitched out west together. Then Evil and Ross split up. When Grady found out Ross, aka Football, had been transported back to Montreal, he was anxious to talk to him.
I thought he could probably be the best witness in this case. And if you think of it, the one guy's street name is Football. The other's is Evil. And I mean, it may be very basic, but when you're dealing with this, and one was 16 and the other was a little older, one was a bit more of a leader on the street scene, being Evil, a guy who'd been around the streets a bit longer. He'd had a bit of a checkered past, been in and out of trouble with the police, whereas Ross, at this stage, was 16 and didn't seem to have the history that we knew of at that time. And as we're interviewing him, we realize he has a pair of 8-hole Doc Marten boots on. When I showed Ross the picture of the deceased wearing the boots at the Eaton Center with the other people, all friends of his, he took a look at the picture and he just moved back. He goes, "They're hers. Take them." And he took the boots right off there and gave them to us.
Ross claimed Evil had sold him the boots. Then he told detectives about running into Evil and Cynthia on that fateful Sunday night, and how they'd invited him to come back to the squat with them to smoke some hash. The only way into the squat was a third-floor window, and Ross helped Cynthia climb in. They smoked and went to sleep.
And then in the morning, he got up, went off to the Scott Mission, got some new clothes, and then met up with Harbottle, and off they went to Points West. He basically gave us Harbottle with exclusive opportunity.
Meaning he didn't say he saw Evil kill Cynthia, but he certainly implied it. But Grady didn't entirely buy Ross's story. He had a hunch Ross was more involved than he was letting on.
You know, there was nothing to substantiate it, but we were much more concerned after the interview than we were, before, that's for sure.
At this time, blood samples were voluntary. Through his lawyer, Ross declined to give one. But the detectives rushed back in to collect the used cigarette butts for saliva samples.
We actually take the paper itself, and then we would extract, put it into a special liquid. In the case of ABO typing, it's just water, because the ABO substances are soluble in water.
The ABO system could not nail a suspect, but it could exclude one.
Ross was an A secretor, so he was eliminated because there was no group A substance found on the vodka bottle or on the vaginal swabs from the deceased.
Maybe Grady's hunch about Ross was wrong. Maybe he'd been telling the truth, that Evil was the soul-sick murderer. But when they eventually caught up with Evil, he would tell quite a different story. Grady had been getting police updates about Evil's whereabouts, but he still couldn't catch him. Then something he never expected happened. Evil called him.
He was phoning and trying to say that he was a nice guy. He didn't do anything, doesn't know what went on. And we had him arrested while he was in a payphone.
For the first time, Grady was face to face with Evil. Grady had a tape recorder with him. He turned it on and asked Evil if he wanted to say anything. This is a story Evil told him on the ride back. Yes, Ross had run into him and Cynthia that Sunday night. And yes, they'd helped Cynthia climb into the squat. And yes, they'd smoked some hash and gone to sleep. But this is where Evil's story differed from Ross's. In Evil's account, both he and Ross had gone off in the morning to the Scott mission to get clean clothes, leaving Cynthia still sleeping. But according to Evil, he and Ross both went back to the squat. Ross wanted sex, and when Cynthia wasn't interested, Ross said, "Let's rape her." Evil thought it was a prank, but it suddenly got serious when Ross started cutting off Cynthia's clothes and tied her up. Then Ross sexually assaulted Cynthia with the vodka bottle. Cynthia cried she was going to the police, so Ross took Evil to the next room and said, "Well then, we're going to have to kill her." And Evil said, "Go for it, but do it kindly." But there was nothing kind about it. Evil and Ross tried cutting her wrists. When that didn't work, they carried her downstairs and strangled her with her bra. Then they went out to huff some glue. That's when they decided to return to the squat and hide Cynthia's body under an overturned couch and set the whole thing on fire. It was brutal and sadistic. Ross, meanwhile, was on the lam. It took police 2 months to find him.
He's arrested in Montreal for doing a robbery of a kid, and the robbery was for a pair of 8-hole Doc Marten boots.
Evil was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life. But Ross denied any part in Cynthia Ray's murder.
He has never admitted to it. Has never admitted his part, has denied everything, denied sexually assaulting the deceased in this matter, has denied anything to do with the vodka bottle or anything like that.
Evil was willing to testify against Ross, but what judge or jury would believe him? It would all come down to the vodka bottle. Exhibit A. We're all used to hearing about the phenomenal results of DNA, but only with fingerprints do you get an absolute match.
What we're looking at is just the root structures, any place where they divide or where they end, where there are small dots. These are all individual characteristics or characteristics that are unique to that one impression. There is no reported or known case of two persons' fingerprints being the same. Okay, this is the actual bottle from the crime scene. They have applied the photograph here to show the actual location of the print. This impression is the left ring finger of Sean Ross. This is on the item in a position consistent with the scenario of Ross using this to sexually assault the victim. I think that's what they call the clincher.
Thanks to this forensic evidence, Sean Ross, aka Football, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life. Because he was a young offender at the time of the incident, he would be eligible for parole in 10 years.
Ross had no conscience, had no remorse. Harbottle, as diminished as the remorse was, at least there was some. As his remorse, to me at least, was for his lack of action dealing with Ross. I think Ross did it because he liked the power, the control, and as he's told other witnesses, he liked watching the eyes bug out. That gave him a lot of power and control. I've been doing this now, the homicides now, for 10 years, and he is one of the wickedest people I've dealt with.
most of the time we don't get involved with the people. We get involved with samples. But there are still cases, doesn't matter, they get to you no matter how you try and keep them from doing so. And usually those are really nasty cases. They're the kind that can give you nightmares.
How many of us can think of the close calls of our youth when we unknowingly put ourselves in awful danger and how lucky we were to escape? Cynthia Ray had her whole life ahead of her. Like so many teenagers before her, she was just trying to fit into a scene. The tragedy is that on that fateful Sunday night, Cynthia Ray got too close to the flame when she entered the house where evil lives.
It's like he's playing a game with you. He's trying to find out what you have by the questions you ask. If he's her guardian, and I believe he was, he's not doing a whole lot to help her this time. So that's why I believe that was her last day.
Is it a bite? Is it a human bite? Also, it was an aggressive type bite mark because it was a single penetration.
Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. One of his dozens of love letters went like this: "Never stop believing in yourself as I believe in you. No matter what happens, Natalia, I will always be there for you. My love for you is unconditional." Where does love end and obsession begin? Exhibit A, a bite mark on a body. Natalia Mazursky was 21 when she arrived from Russia on Valentine's Day, 1992. Her family was heartbroken to see her go, but knew that life would be better for their daughter in Canada, the promised land. She came to marry Ivan Kravchuk, a Russian boy who had immigrated before her. But the marriage broke up after a few short months and Ivan moved out west, later filing for divorce. Natalia, now all alone in a new country, decided to enroll at university in interior design. At home, she'd been a talented painter. In her first 2 years in Canada, she had several exhibitions of her work. By this time, she had met Alex Plotkin, another Russian who had grown up in Canada. They eventually started living together. Natalia felt they were meant for each other. But it was a stormy relationship, and she asked Alex to move out. Around that time, Gilbert Ho, a friend of a friend, helped her get a job at a trendy downtown restaurant. That's where she met Glenn Rollins. Glenn had money and was a regular at the restaurant. Less than a month after he had known her, they became engaged. But after a drunken confrontation one night, it all ended. But Natalia wasn't the kind of woman you could easily forget. They all stayed in touch with her. It was on a Monday morning in January when Natalia's phone started to ring. It rang on and off all day and night, but no one answered it. No one.
Hey, Princess, it's me. Good morning. I took care of all that divorce stuff with Ivan for you, so not to worry.
Hey, Natalia, I'm just picking up a pizza and bringing it over.
Hey, it's me. Just getting off work. I was gonna come over.
Where are you? It's Ivan. I've been calling you. Give me a call.
It continued to ring over the next 2 days and nights.
Hey, where were you?
Natalia. This is Ivan.
Hey, Nat, it's Annie. Didn't see you at school today. People have been looking for you.
Hope you got the rent money together. Otherwise, you're going to get evicted. Bye, Princess. Talk to you later.
Just give me a call so I know you're okay.
By Thursday, her friend Gilbert Ho, the bartender from the restaurant, was worried enough to get the superintendent to check on her apartment. Something horrible had happened. Natalia is dead. Gilbert calls police. Homicide is brought in.
It was a very cold day. The door was open to the balcony, and I thought perhaps it was for the dog. You don't leave your balcony door open in January. The first thing that I remember when I walked in the apartment was a small bathroom to my left, and I could see a body in the bathtub. The bedroom door was opened. That tells you where it happened.
The body is a crime scene unto itself. It tells its own story.
The striking injuries in this case were those to the head area, and the face, for example, showed multiple lacerations. Lacerations are tears of the skin. The red marks here are indicating the sites of lacerations. This is tearing of the skin from, as you can see here, the forehead, as well as both the right and left sides of the scalp. So one can say that we're dealing with a blunt object, and we're dealing with a very large number, greater than 20 blows or impacts to the head.
An injury like this suggests the possibility of a hammer or hammer-like object, which is what they found when the tub was drained. The number of blows to the head and face indicates a great deal of anger towards the victim. Then the pathologist noticed something that was going to prove invaluable for investigators.
There was an abrasion, which is a scraping of the skin around the left nipple. And it was the configuration, the shape of this abrasion, which was semicircular, which suggested to myself that this may well have been a bite mark.
The use of teeth and bite marks for forensic identification purposes goes back over 100 years.
The first question, or the first fork in the road, is it a bite? And then the second fork in the road is it a human bite? And then the third fork in the road is, which human? Well, in this case, it was there were two markings, one above the nipple and one below the nipple on the deceased, and the markings were consistent with a human bite. And furthermore, they were consistent with a bite mark, in my opinion, that was of a sexual nature, being as it was on the breast, and also it was an aggressive type bite mark because it was a single penetration, fleeting sexual bite where there was grasping, enough pressure to break the skin, yet there was no central bruising that one would see, say, for example, with a hickey or an affectionate bite mark.
Dr. Wood also determines that the bite mark was made at the same time as the head wounds. It suggests that whoever bit Natalia Mazursky had also murdered her. The blows to the head, the vicious bite mark, the drowning. Someone's hatred had exploded at this beautiful young woman. Would Exhibit A, this human bite mark, be enough to catch a brutal killer? In the week following Natalia's murder, Detective Mike Hamill returns repeatedly to her apartment. He needs to take it all in at his own pace, piece by piece, clue by clue.
You have to spend a lot of time there. You have to look around. You have to sit there and look and try to put pieces together in your own mind. I'm trying to figure out what happened. There's no signs of forcible entry, so obviously she invited them in. There was no blood from the bed on the floor to the bathroom. And normally when the body's moved right after the murder or after being assaulted, there's blood involved, you'll see drag marks in this. It happens very quickly.
In order to interpret the scene, investigators call in blood expert Susan Kern. The blood spatter adds to the chilling story of the murder.
They called me here to assist them to understand if the beating actually occurred in the bedroom and that she was later transported to the bathroom, and how to best photograph these stains to preserve the information at the scene. It all appears to originate from somewhere on the bed, traveling, as you can see by the arrows, outwards from this location. If a hammer, in this case, has been used to deliver repeated blows to a surface that is continuing to produce liquid blood from it, such as a head, during the swinging of the weapon, the liquid blood will come away from the surface of the hammer itself, and those droplets will impact on whatever surface is around, such as the ceiling. And in my mind, the only way to get from one room to the other room without leaving a lot of blood is that she had been wrapped up in say, a blanket or a sleeping bag or something of that nature to prevent the blood from dripping onto the floor.
One of the biggest puzzles in the bedroom was a ring of blood on the dresser. She had one dresser in her bedroom, and it's like someone had taken a cup, placed it on the bed, on the blood while it was still fresh, and then placed the cup on the dresser. And then in the bathroom we found a cup which appeared to be the same size as of the ring on the dresser.
Hamill felt the fact that the killer moved around from room to room with this cup meant that he was at ease in Natalia's apartment.
I was satisfied that the person who killed her was very close to her.
From Natalia's birth control pills and an interview with Natalia's neighbor who remembered hearing a loud bang on his adjacent bedroom wall, the time of death is established as late Sunday or early Monday morning. Hamill began to investigate his suspects, keeping in mind that one of them had viciously bitten Natalia. The first person Detective Hamill brought into interview on videotape was Gilbert Ho, because he was the first person to discover the body.
He came across as someone that she needed because she was going through some difficult times in her life. And he came across as her crying shoulder whenever she needed someone. He was the guy. He left several messages on her answering machine. Those messages were left after she was dead.
Gilbert had helped her with a school project that Sunday night, the last time he saw her alive. He said that her ex-husband Ivan phoned from out west that night to discuss their divorce. Gilbert offered to help her with the details. Ivan's voice was also identified on her answering machine several days after they believed she was murdered. Gilbert, who claimed to also be Natalia's sometime lover, said Natalia later got a call from some guy she said she was going out to meet. That's why Gilbert left her at 11:30 on Sunday night. Had the mysterious caller been her murderer? The cops asked Gilbert if he knew anything else about the other men in Natalia's life. Gilbert told them about her boyfriend, Alex. A shirt of his was found on her bedroom floor soaked in blood. Alex's voice was also identified on her answering machine. Gilbert told detectives that he had more than once had to console Natalia in the restaurant after a row with Alex. Alex admitted having sex with her on the Friday and Saturday before her murder.
When I first met her boyfriend, he was very, very emotionally upset. A nice, easygoing guy, very pleasant. I can see why she would like him.
The final suspect was a doozy, Glenn Rollins, her ex-fiancé from the restaurant. Glenn was very possessive of Natalia, and one night shortly after they were engaged, he barged into her apartment building drunk. He claimed Natalia was playing him for a sucker and demanded his engagement ring back. When she wouldn't open the door, he became enraged. This was just 1 month before Natalia's murder.
And of course, he became a suspect because of that. I mean, you just don't come over and break down the door with a sledgehammer.
Glenn was charged with assault. When she was later found murdered, the media was all over him. Their theory was that he was a spurned lover with a streak of violence. These were the 4 suspects. Mike Hamill would need to make bite mark impressions from all of them. While Hamill was still investigating, Natalia's family came over from Russia to attend her funeral.
You could tell it when you met the family. I mean, our cultures are way off. They're very different. And you could sense the feeling from these people. They just couldn't understand, how could this happen?
In addition to Natalia's family, 3 of the suspects were also there: Ivan, Alex, and Gilbert. Mike Hamill was there too as a mourner and an investigator.
In these types of cases, or any other homicide cases, you're going to end up with a number of suspects. The faster you eliminate them, the more time you'll have to spend on your real suspect.
Ivan Kravchuk, Natalia's ex-husband, still lived out west, and it didn't appear that he could have flown in and committed the murder.
He had a perfect alibi, so he was out of the picture as a suspect.
As for Alex Plotkin, on the night of the murder, his roommate swore he'd been sleeping on the couch and was still there when she returned from work late that night.
But he had his own place, and we had an alibi for him as well.
Then there was Gilbert Ho. He came over to Detective Hamill and thanked him for coming. This was tough for Hamill because he had begun to suspect Gilbert.
Of course, we suspected that he was the murderer, and sometimes it's difficult to be there and play a role, play the dummy. Yeah, of course you have to.
Hamill had suspicions from his very first interview with Mr. Ho.
He was drained out of his emotions, and there should have been something more. He was claiming to be a very good friend, and very good friends don't react the way he did.
Investigators also learned that even though Gilbert had a wife and 2 young children, he had paid for all of Natalia's furniture and her rent. People from the restaurant where they worked said that Gilbert was in love with Natalia.
When we spoke to Gilbert Ho, we asked him if he loved her, and yes, he loved her. We asked him if he had sex with her. He said he did. I don't believe he did, ever. I asked him, well, did you bite her? And the next question, if he's willing to say, well, I didn't bite her, but I may have sucked on her breast. Okay, well, the next question is, would you have hurt her? No, I would never hurt her.
Gilbert was willing to give Detective Hamill his bite mark impression right away. So was Alex. But what about Glenn Rollins, Natalia's ex-fiancé who had assaulted her? He had an alibi for the night of the murder too. That he'd gone to see Get Shorty with a friend. Glenn Rollins agreed to give Hamill his bite mark impression in exchange for dropping the assault charges. It would all come down to the bite mark impressions.
Here you have the 3 suspects' models the question has to be looked at from two ways. Is it this person? And that's important to the police. And can I exclude this person? And if I can exclude the person, certainly that's very important to the police, for the police to know as well. This is the tape that was shown to the jury that was made from the computer. And what we have here, we have suspect 3's teeth, which we are superimposing on the bite mark over the breast. These teeth are obviously not a match. They're far too wide. They're at an odd angulation for this to be a possible match, both in the upper and in the lower arch. So we're moving on now to the second suspect. But again, they're too large. The arch is too large, and where there are teeth that should be leaving marks, there are no marks. And now we have Mr. Ho's dentition and the corrected teeth here, and they fit quite nicely. He's got a smaller arch, and the teeth can be seen to be in the proper position for making the blackened bruises that appear both above and below the nipple. The outlines of the teeth fit very nicely with the bruises. You'll see them disappear and the bruises appear right beneath where the markings are. So I concluded that this was a match. I believe, and I'm not certain, that Mr. Ho denied making a bite mark on the breast, and now we have somehow miraculously his dentition's print on this woman's breast.
This is the story that Detective Hamill and his team were able to piece together. It turned out that Gilbert was broke. The checks he had written for Natalia's rent had bounced, and she was going to be evicted the very next day. And she didn't even know it. So when Gilbert went over to Natalia's that Sunday night, he knew this might be his last night with his princess, and that the relationship was about to change.
Here's this poor girl. She's about to be evicted. She has no clue this is about to happen. And her guardian, if he's her guardian, and I believe he was, he's not doing a whole lot to help her this time. So that's why I believe that that was her last day.
Hamill believed Gilbert wanted sex. After everything he had done for Natalia, it was the least she could do for him. When she refused, he exploded in outrage. He bludgeoned her, then he bit her, then he thought about what to do next. He wrapped her head in a towel and carried her to the tub to try to cover it up.
It's the only mistake he made, was he bit her. Because without that, we could not put Mr. Ho at the scene at the time of her death.
Gilbert Ho was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison.
He was obsessed with her. If he could not have her, no one else could.
No matter what happens, I will always be there for you. My love for you is unconditional. Maybe Natalia, anxious to fit into her newly adopted country, ignored the signs of Gilbert Ho's obsession. Maybe she didn't have the heart to tell him to leave her alone. The tragedy is no one else did either. Natalia Mazursky was buried almost 3 years to the day she arrived in this country, on Valentine's Day. She will always remain a beautiful Russian princess.
It's not common where you see someone about to be killed. Two of the accused were blaming each other. Both wanted to be one of the robbers as opposed to the one who was the actual shooter.
Our task was to identify which one of these suspects was potentially the killer.
It's the first time I've heard a judge tell the jury after their verdict that they were naive and gullible.
Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Imagine you're an associate professor in the athletic department at a university, and one day you get a phone call from the police asking you to help solve a violent crime. Well, that's exactly what happened to Susan Tupling. Tupling's specialty is sports biomechanics, looking at human movement in a sports context so that athletes from beginners to pros can have more success sooner and fewer potential injuries. At the end of the 19th century, thanks to the development of a faster shutter speed, Edward Muybridge did a famous series of photographs. This was the birth of movies and the birth of biomechanics, because for the first time, human movement could be studied frame by frame. But none of this prepared Susan Tupling when out of the blue, the police called.
There had been a homicide, and they wanted to find out about the heights of these potential suspects and they had a video of it.
A homicide? A video? Wait a minute. Our story begins around 4:30 on a dark winter morning. The police have answered an emergency call at a variety store. The store clerk had been shot dead.
We went into the store initially to have a quick look at the body, to get a feel for what this situation was about. And we learned that there was a video camera within the store, mounted up above the cash register area. We're hopeful that the tape is running and that the tape is good enough quality to capture what's happened.
But there is a problem. The surveillance tape is on a 6-hour loop before it records over itself, and the VCR is locked in a backroom office.
So I had one of the officers smash the glass in that window to get access to it and retrieve the tape.
Exhibit A, a surveillance tape. The tape is sent to a police lab with special video equipment. Outside, Fatima Perez arrives to pick up her son as planned. Detectives try to break his death to her gently. Just as the tragedy is sinking in, a TV camera crew is upon her. Angel Perez, her son, was 27. Being a dutiful son, he still lived at home, helping to support his mother and siblings. When he was laid off as a plumber's assistant, rather than go on welfare, Angel took a minimum wage job working in a nearby variety store. The night in question, he'd been working the midnight shift. Between midnight and 3, he worked with the store owner. After 3, Angel was on his own. Now he was dead. As with all homicides, Angel Perez's body is sent to the morgue to be autopsied. The pathologist will determine exactly how the store clerk died.
The cause of death is attributable to a shotgun wound. The pellets were found mainly on the frontal portion of the skull and facial bones. A snowstorm of lead fragments is associated with the pellets within the head. And if we look at this next X-ray, there are a large number of pellets embedded in the left hand and wrist. The effect of powder and unburnt powder against the bone of the skull, and would indicate that the gun was discharged from a close range. That the individual's injuries are quite compatible with him lying on the ground with his left hand and wrist close to the side of his head, face down, in a non-offensive position.
The conclusion? Angel wasn't defending himself. It was an execution-style murder. At the murder scene, forensic identification officers are particularly interested in a footprint on the store's Formica countertop. Normally, when we think of clues, we think of fingerprints. But in reality, footprints help solve more crimes. Taking footprint impressions is usually a straightforward procedure. Not this time. Somehow, in trying to transfer the footprint to tape, it vanishes. It's not on the tape and has disappeared from the Formica counter. This phenomenon is rare but not unheard of among footprint examiners. Meanwhile, police have viewed the surveillance video. The good news is that it shows the crime. The bad news is how grainy it is.
The quality of video that we receive from stores, banks, whatever, is very bad quality because these tapes are played over and over and over again, and sometimes they're not the best quality videotapes. I'm able to improve the brightness, the contrast. I can filter. We can help to alleviate the background noise. What we're trying to do is sharpen the image, which can identify either jackets, footwear, or the faces.
Even using digital enhancement, the videotape can only be cleaned up marginally.
We knew that we were not going to be able to facially identify anyone from the video. And we also felt that we could not tell the skin color of the individuals, nor the sex of the individuals.
If Gauthier tells the press how little he knows about the perpetrators, it'll give the felons a psychological boost. But given the violent nature of the crime, the media is all over the police, clamoring for details. In the end, he decides to broadcast the video as a special bulletin. This will give him a chance to enlist the public's help without subjecting himself to a media scrum. The videotape you are about to see is the real thing. The actual videotape of the murder, as narrated by Detective Gauthier. To protect the innocent, the name of the store and the name of the victim have been bleeped out.
The videotape you are about to see will show the store clerk walk towards the front of the store and then out of the camera view. Seconds later, you will see suspect number 1 enter the store carrying a long barrel firearm. The suspect immediately walks toward Mr. At this time, suspect number 1 shoots Mr. in the head, killing the store clerk. Suspects number 2 and number 3 enter the store carrying empty garbage cans. You will see that they now are joined by suspect number 1 near the store counter. Suspects number 2 and number 3 then jump over the counter and ransack the cabinets, stealing a quantity of cigarettes. Three suspects then leave the store via the same front door. Suspect number 1, dark color clothing, a waist-length coat, a hat and bandana are worn over the face. This person is wearing dark gloves. Suspect number 2 is wearing a black color hip-length hooded coat. The Detroit Red Wings logo is on the center of the back. Suspect number 3 is wearing a black waist-length hooded coat, and below that, in the center of the jacket, is the Bulls logo. The Metropolitan Toronto Police request the help of the public in solving this brutal execution-style murder.
A picture is worth 1,000 words, but in this case, a videotape, Exhibit A, raised 1,000 questions. Though the videotape of the robbery murder couldn't immediately identify any of the suspects, Detective Gauthier knew it was crucial to the investigation.
It's not common that you see something like this where you see someone about to be killed, and you're watching the tape knowing that someone's about to be killed, and you see them in real life and you know that in 5 seconds they're gone.
The videotape showed a car's headlights in the store's front window. Someone else had pulled into the plaza that night. From viewing the rest of the tape, detectives determined no one else had entered the store.
Who would be at the plaza at that time of night? There was nothing open in the plaza except the store. The only other thing that is accessible is the ATM machine in the bank. We contacted the bank to find out whether or not anybody had used that machine throughout the early morning hours. When we did find, in fact, an individual at about that time, when we spoke to him, he then related a story to us about what he had seen when he arrived at the plaza.
This is what the witness told investigators he saw. During his special bulletin, Detective Gauthier had also broadcast information about the red car. A police officer called homicide after seeing the TV broadcast to report he'd had the abandoned car towed to a pound. The car, it turned out, belonged to a woman named Andrea Goodwin. This seemed to fit nicely with a Crime Stoppers tip investigators received that the perpetrators in the murder robbery were two men and a woman. But under questioning, Andrea Goodwin claimed she knew nothing about any robbery. She said when she'd picked up her car, she'd found garbage cans, a gun, and cartons of cigarettes. Not knowing where they'd come from, they dumped the cigarettes and the garbage cans by the side of the road and tossed the gun into a dumpster. Investigators recovered the cigarettes and the garbage cans, but the gun was never recovered.
Well, the shotgun had gone to the Pickering land site. Those are vast, vast properties. It's an impossible task to try and find something that size as a sawed-off shotgun in a vast expanse like that.
If Andrea Goodwin was telling the truth, how had her car ended up as a getaway car? Andrea Goodwin said she'd lent it for the night to her boyfriend, Wallace Avery. This was his story. He had rented the car to a guy named Hugh Goff in exchange for crack cocaine. Then he had gone off to do the rock. He swore he was telling the truth. What gave Detective Gauthier pause was learning that Avery had just been released from prison for armed robbery.
He seemed, certainly by his background, he would be somebody that would be apt to do this. We spent days analyzing the story of this woman's boyfriend, comparing it to what we knew from the scene and other information that had come in.
As investigators checked out Avery's story, they also searched for Hugh Goff, the man who had allegedly rented the red car that night. They couldn't find Goff, but they tracked down his girlfriend. Under questioning, she reluctantly admitted that hours after the murder, she'd driven Goff to New York City so he could make his escape. As American colleagues tried to locate Goff in New York City, detectives in Toronto received a number of Crime Stoppers tips about a guy named Sherwin Alexander. Alexander was brought in for questioning. Alexander admitted he was involved in the robbery, but he swore he was not the murderer. According to Alexander, he was the one wearing the Chicago Bulls jacket. His 17-year-old friend was wearing the Red Wings jacket, and Hugh Goff, in the black jacket, was the shooter. Case solved? Nah. According to Goff's girlfriend, on the drive to New York City, Goff had told her a totally different story. Goff admitted he was involved in the robbery, but swore that Sherwin Alexander was the one who shot the store clerk. In Goff's account, he also had the 17-year-old in the Red Wings jacket. But Goff claimed he was the one wearing the Bulls jacket, and Alexander was the shooter in the black jacket.
Two of the accused were blaming each other. They were admitting they were involved in the event, but both wanted to be one of the robbers as opposed to the one who was the actual shooter.
Who was telling the truth? The height difference between the two was about 8 inches. Could investigators use that difference to single out the shooter? Remember the footprint that disappeared?
The investigators from Metro, they brought me the full counter. So I got an electric saw and I cut it down to size, to this size, so that it was a workable size. So the first thing that I do, I'm going to capture the footwear on the arborite top with the camera. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to completely wipe off with alcohol the footwear impression. With the camera, I'm going to capture the exact same area. And then I'm going to digitize it so that I can analyze it with the computer. Having now captured both images, Number 1 being the arborite top with the footwear impression, and number 2 being just the arborite top on its own. I'm going to subtract one image from the other, and I'm left with the footwear impression.
The print seemed to come from a size 12 Converse sneaker. Detectives wondered if knowing that could help determine whether Goff or Alexander was in the bull's jacket. By a process of elimination, the other one would be the shooter in the black jacket. That's when they got hold of Susan Tupling.
But the idea was, could I, from that, know how tall this potential subject was? And of course I couldn't, because people of all different heights have size 12 shoes if it was a size 12 shoe. So I couldn't do it from there.
Tupling used biomechanics to study human movement in the lab, but would it work to catch Angel Perez's killer? Who had been the shooter, Goff or Alexander? Detective Gauthier was relying on biomechanics to pinpoint the killer.
Our main focus was to find the one with the gun. So the biomechanical was everything to us to establish that we had the right individual as being the trigger man.
From the early days of Edward Muybridge's photos through contemporary biomechanics studies, the subjects were often in no clothes or tight-fitting clothes. That was perfect for Tupling's academic studies, but in the robbery murder, the suspects were in hoods and hats and bulky clothes. Then there was the camera angle. Lab studies were done at eye level. The angle from the store's surveillance camera from above foreshortened heights. Another problem, which image of the suspects should they try to measure?
They were always running, crouching down, reaching over to grab things off of shelves. And so they never stood perfectly still for us. And that's how you measure someone's height. They have to stand perfectly upright for you. And these suspects, as in most human movements, you just don't conform to that sort of situation.
By examining the video frame by frame, Tupling found 2 locations where they could see a suspect's head and feet, and the suspect stood straight up.
The idea is to find when he's standing vertical. He has to be on one leg or 2 legs standing straight up. And just before he jumps over, he is standing as vertical as he's going to be. That's about it right there. But if we could calibrate the volume that they were in, set up some sort of an X, Y, Z axis, a big grid within the whole store, then we could sort of use our 3-dimensional techniques that we use within the lab all the time to make an estimate of how tall the different suspects were.
Tupling's colleague had developed a technique using a calibrated frame and moving it around the store. When the numbers from the various X, Y, Z coordinates were crunched into the computer, it essentially turned the 2D image into a 3D determination of volume. From the volume, they hoped they could figure out the heights of the 3 suspects. Then the results were analyzed and double-checked to ensure accuracy.
We concluded there were 3 unique heights with quite large differences between them. So between the shortest and the middle suspects, there was 4 inches difference. And between the middle and the tallest, we had 6 inches difference. In the video, the suspect with the black coat was the one who carried the gun into the store and performed the shooting. And our data indicated that he was the shortest of the 3 suspects.
So Alexander, the shortest guy, was the shooter in the black jacket. Based on all this is what investigators think happened on the night in question. After trading crack for the red car, Goff picked up Alexander and the 17-year-old and drove to the variety store. There they waited outside watching. The last customer left around 3:15. Alexander, the gunman, entered first. Then Goff and the 17-year-old entered, Goff wearing the bull's jacket. Goff and the 17-year-old were convicted of armed robbery. Sherwin Alexander was charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution contended that the killing of Angel Perez was an execution-style murder. The defense argued that Alexander's gun had gone off accidentally. Because the gun had never been recovered, the jury refused to rule out the possibility the gun had discharged accidentally. In the end, Sherwin Alexander's charge was reduced and he was sentenced to manslaughter. Angel's mother and siblings were furious with what they considered the leniency of the sentences.
I can't explain why the jury came back with a manslaughter on to us what was clearly an execution case. It's the first time I've heard a judge tell the jury after their verdict that they were naive and gullible, were his words.
I don't think I thought of the human factor initially. We were so wrapped up with making sure everything was so accurate and so precise. And then it sort of hits you that this is the human factor. This is what it was all about.
The art of moving pictures and the science of biomechanics had been born together at the turn of the century. 100 years later, they came together again to decipher a video and help investigators convict a murderer. Take a rich tycoon. He's one and only child. The tycoon's second wife. Add a $2 million will. Mutual suspicion. And a rookie document examiner. It takes the same kind of examination skills to determine if a document is genuine as it does to pronounce it a forgery. Enter the world of forensic science, the science of crime, where a suspect's guilt or innocence can hang on a single piece of evidence. Think of famous signatures, Napoleon, Shakespeare, and Michael Jordan. Each worth a fortune. Yet this signature, unknown except to his immediate family, would be worth $2 million. Exhibit A. The last will and testament of Mr. Dennis Lloyd. Dennis Lloyd was a self-made man. Devoting himself to making money, by the time he was 60, he owned extensive real estate and a lucrative paper factory. In the town of Markham, Ontario, he was a rich fish in a medium-sized pond. But as a person, Dennis Lloyd was cold and distant. He rarely visited with his grown-up son, Barry, and Barry's family. And he could be curt and insensitive to his second wife, Carolyn. The first time Dennis brought Carolyn to spend Christmas with Barry's family, he only succeeded in creating a rivalry between them. After that, Dennis's affection seemed to swing between Carolyn and Barry. 1 month favoring one, the next month the other. This was the situation when Dennis suffered a serious heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital. When his condition improved, he refused to think about death or talk about his will. Then 3 weeks later, he suddenly died of cardiac arrest. In their moment of grief, there was a temporary softening of their long-standing enmity. But a few weeks later, Carolyn and Barry were summoned by the estate's executor to a reading of Dennis's will. Dennis Lloyd's will left $20,000 annually to Carolyn. But the bulk of his $2 million estate went to Barry, his wife, and son. Carolyn was shocked. Barry, of course, was delighted, as much by the clear acknowledgement of his dad's love as by the money. Zachary Bloom, Carolyn's lawyer, examined the will. He was suspicious because the will was 7 years old, but a search for more recent will proved fruitless. Dennis Lloyd died in March. Despite Carolyn's dismay at the will, her sorrow was so profound that it took 4 months before she could enter Dennis's private bedroom. Finally, she asked her longtime gardener to help her pack her husband's effects. When the gardener went to clear out a dresser, Carolyn told him Dennis never kept anything valuable in it. But she was wrong. Hidden in a Bible was a new will. A will that would be the centerpiece of a huge legal battle. A winner-take-all battle between stepmother and son. Based on this, the parties reconvened at the executor's office. Carolyn came accompanied by her lawyer, Zachary Bloom, as well as by the 2 witnesses to the new will, Dennis's friend and real estate agent Stanley Pavel, and Cassandra Edmonds, a family friend who at one time had been Dennis's executive secretary. To protect his interests, Barry brought along his attorney. The new will, dated the previous Thanksgiving, left $500,000 to Barry and his family. The rest of Dennis Lloyd's real estate holdings and paper factory went to Carolyn. This time it was Carolyn's turn to be delighted. Barry was incensed. More than that, he was suspicious. The previous Christmas, his father had made him certain promises about his estate. Barry was adamant that his father would never have hidden this new will from him. When people have suspicions about documents, there's a place to check them out. At the Center of Forensic Sciences, there's a whole section that examines documents. Using a variety of machines and techniques, document experts can investigate and analyze everything from ransom notes to checks made with invisible ink to questions of cheating on university exams. The student hadn't cheated, the professor was wrong. One of the main areas is document examination. Everything from watermarks and typeface to handwriting and signatures. Greg Dawson is the head of the documents section, but at the time he was just a rookie.
It was assigned to me because they thought it was fairly straightforward. It was a simple one-page document, a little bit of typewriting on it, and one signature. What could be so more simple than that? Just one word, D. Lloyd, was written. Combination of 6 letters.
6 letters worth $2 million. So the resource was there for Barry to authenticate the will. One major problem. A clause at the bottom of the will that said, if any beneficiary should contest any of the bequests herein to him or her, then such person or persons is not to receive the said bequest. In other words, if Barry contested the will and lost, he would lose everything. Was it worth the gamble? Did Barry really have grounds for suspicion? Or was it just sour grapes, jealousy that in his final act his father had chosen Carolyn over him? After weighing it over, Barry decided to risk it all. Barry went to court against his stepmother. $2 million, winner take all. The issue, whether Dennis Lloyd's new will was genuine or a forgery. If it was a forgery, Barry would get it all. If it was genuine, Carolyn would keep it all. It was to be a civil trial decided by a judge. Given that a deceased cannot testify, an exception is made in cases concerning wills allowing both sides to give hearsay evidence. Barry Lloyd took the stand. The heart of his case was a promise his father had made him the previous Christmas. While Carolyn was off in Italy, his father spent the holidays with Barry's family. Dennis told Barry about having spent his whole life worrying about money. Now he was concerned what would happen to it when he died. Dennis confided to his son that he planned to leave Carolyn $20,000 annually, but he wanted his paper factory and the rest of his $2 million estate to go to his flesh and blood. Barry truly believed that his father would never have changed his mind without saying something. Plus, there were a lot of strange circumstances surrounding this latest will. For instance, why would his father, who had never been religious, hide his will inside a Bible? And why, if this new will was dated the previous Thanksgiving, did it only come to light 4 months after his father's death? Dennis's friend, Stanley Pavel, provided the answer. The previous Thanksgiving, Stanley and his wife, Dennis and Carolyn, and Cassandra Edmonds had all gone on a fun weekend junket to Las Vegas. Though Dennis didn't gamble, he loved to watch Stanley gamble. On that Saturday night, Dennis suddenly whispered he wanted Stanley to come up to his hotel suite right away. As they entered the room, they saw Carolyn and Cassandra, who had just come back from shopping. On the pretense they had to catch an early dinner and show, Dennis urged Carolyn to get ready as quickly as possible. Then he took a piece of paper out of his briefcase. It was his will, and he wanted them to witness it. Dennis made them both promise not to mention anything to Carolyn. He wanted the new will to be a surprise. That was why Carolyn hadn't known about the new will until after Dennis Lloyd's death, when it fell out of the Bible. Cassandra Edmonds confirmed Stanley Pavel's story. She testified that as Dennis's secretary, she had heard him criticize Barry for thinking money grew on trees, adding that Barry would be in for a big surprise if he thought he was going to inherit the old man's money. It all made sense, more than Barry Lloyd wanted to admit. But Barry wasn't about to give up. He was suspicious about certain spelling mistakes in the will. For instance, the city of Markham, M-A-R-K-H-A-M, the only city Dennis Lloyd had lived in since coming over from England, was misspelled. More inexplicable, his father's last name, Lloyd, L-L-O-Y-D, was misspelled in the very first line. Dennis was a meticulous man, so why would he have left these mistakes in? Zachary Bloom testified that he and his wife had also gone to Las Vegas Thanksgiving weekend. and that he had accidentally run into Dennis Lloyd. Dennis didn't trust most lawyers, but he trusted Bloom. He insisted Bloom accompany him to a local notary public. He wanted to prepare a new will. Bloom told the court the Las Vegas notary public was neither the most meticulous nor smartest man. This was the first time he'd ever met Dennis Lloyd, and he'd never even heard of Markham, Ontario, hence the spelling errors. Barry found this more plausible than he cared to admit, but he wasn't ready to give up. It was now time to hear about the examination of the will itself. Dawson first checked the will to make sure nothing had been added or erased. It hadn't. Then he checked the watermark on the paper. If you hold up good paper to the light, you'll see a watermark, which is how paper is registered. Wills are usually prepared on good paper. The question was,
is it registered or not? If it is, then it'll give us a date at which that watermark first came on the market. And if the will is dated 1978, for example, or 77, and I find that watermark never came on the market until 1980, we know right away this has been a backdated document.
The watermark was called Old Liverpool Bond. Checking the standard reference book, Dawson discovered it was not registered. This neither ruled the paper in nor out. Next, Dawson checked the typeface to see if it could be traced back to a particular typewriter.
The typeface, again, was very unusual. We still haven't ever seen a typeface such as this. All of the lowercase letters in this will were in script style. That is, it kind of looks like it's connected. It looks like it's very rounded handwriting, where each letter touches the next letter, except for the capital letters. All capital letters were in a monotone style.
Even to this day, Dawson has never seen another typeface like it. The uniqueness of both the watermark and the typeface could be argued for or against authenticity. It would now come down to one thing and one thing only: whether the signature was real or a forgery. $2 million was riding on it. This is one of Dennis Lloyd's known signatures. This is the one on the will. Were they the same? What do you think? $2 million, winner take all. It was now time for Greg Dawson's moment in the sun. Would he conclude the new will was genuine or a forgery? The judge added that if it was a forgery, then someone had committed a criminal act. There was no in-between. Handwriting is actually more brainwriting. It involves the subconscious. Your mind tells your hand what to write, but one seldom actually thinks, how do I make these characters? These hand movements are ingrained in us when we're quite young. Take an average classroom. Kids start to learn how to write trying to model the handwriting above the blackboard. But even after a very short time, when a teacher collects a class's papers, she can probably identify each student without looking at the name, because they've already begun to place their individual trademarks on their handwriting, a combination of artistic ability and physical ability that makes it uniquely theirs. By the time we've graduated high school, our handwriting is basically set. The nuts and bolts of what Greg Dawson does as a document examiner involves the careful study of one set of writings compared to another set and looking at the minutiae in order to determine whether or not they were written by the same person.
The first thing I do is to begin examining the signature under the microscope, and while I'm looking at it under the microscope, I'm drawing what I'm seeing. So I get a fairly intimate knowledge of the signature, and by looking at it under the microscope and drawing it myself, it's a working habit that forces me to concentrate and focus on the details of the writing.
Greg Dawson carefully compared the signatures.
The question signature starts here, and it begins here with a blunt beginning stroke, and it comes straight down, across here, up, then down, and then it terminates out here. In the known signature, you see it begins at an upstroke here, across here, 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 down, and then over this way. And much more quickly done. See the same movement in here, across, up, around, and then across here. And it ends with kind of a tapering stroke. This one ends with quite an abrupt stroke there. Again, in here, it starts again here with another blunt beginning stroke, and then comes up. The pen is lifted right here. At this point, the pen is raised off the page, and it's reaffixed to the page again at that particular location, and then carries on. In the known Lloyd signatures, it's beginning actually in this direction, comes up, it goes up very quickly, and then quickly down. And you can see the same thing here, it's just up, no pen lift in that particular location. It's an example of a pen lift in an unusual or odd location.
Then there was the question of slope.
You notice that it's sloped just a little bit more than to the left than the known signatures. She is almost vertical, just a little wee bit off the 90 degrees. And these ones here were significantly more to the left than any of the other knowns that I had.
One other feature was intriguing.
Its location above the line. You notice that this signature is written quite a bit above the line. And the two knowns that I have here is pretty much right on, written right on this line. And the same with the signature down here.
Based on these factors, Greg Dawson was ready to render his decision.
The features here are classic indications of forgery. And in fact, in terms of skill of a forgery, this isn't even a very good job.
Following Dawson's testimony, all hell broke loose. Stanley Pavel announced he wanted to come clean and confess he's part in the conspiracy. Cassandra started screaming it was a lie. Zachary Bloom tried to calm everyone. Carolyn fainted. All four were charged with conspiracy to commit fraud.
Carolyn Lloyd swore the mastermind behind the whole conspiracy was lawyer Zachary Bloom, and that he'd come up with the idea of hiding the will in the Bible. For her cooperation, Bloom offered her $1 million, the family home, and a new car every 2 years. Stanley Pavel said he was offered $50,000, and since he was a real estate agent, Bloom promised him the commission from the sale of Dennis Lloyd's businesses. As for Bloom and Cassandra, investigators discovered they were lovers. They owned a small money-losing golf course together, and Bloom personally owed almost $200,000 to his law partners. If the will had gone through, they would have gotten Dennis Lloyd's paper business, which they planned to sell to pay off their debts.
There was some suggestion that this will was drafted in Detroit and that they had an expert forge the signature. If they did have an expert forger, they didn't get their money's worth, that's for sure.
The upshot of all this? Carolyn was sentenced to 1 day in prison and a year's probation. Stanley Pavel received the same sentence plus 3 months for perjury. Cassandra Edmonds was sentenced to 3 years in prison, but because of medical reasons never served time. And lawyer Zachary Bloom was disbarred and sentenced to four years in prison.
After all these years, this case is probably the most memorable one that I've had. It brought the whole excitement of forensic document examiner right to the fore for me. That case solidified my interest in this discipline, and I knew after doing that one, I'm never leaving this work.
As for Barry Lloyd, by contesting the will, he thwarted a greedy scam and inherited his father's estate. He finally got a chance to bask in the knowledge that his father had truly loved him. It's amazing how much trouble can be caused by 6 little letters. The stories on Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities. The names of the guilty are real.
The stories on Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities. The names of the guilty are real. The stories on Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities. The names of the guilty are real. The stories on Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities. The names of the guilty are real. The stories on Exhibit A are based on actual cases. The names of the victims have been changed to protect their identities. The names of the guilty are real.